Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here on the map Norden for a bit of Beastmen against Greenskins gameplay. So, obviously the Cygors were nerfed, and they are still rather competitive. They're still a rather competitive pick, of course. They still have decent accuracy, they still do a lot of damage, still a very monstrous unit, but I've been trying to do something a little different, going back to kind of the Beastmen roots, what used to be kind of the meta, with Morgr the Shadow Gave, backed by other units, and just kind of trying to do something a little different, rather than relying on those Cygors. So, of course, as mentioned, I did bring Morgr. Of course, Morgr has his usual sort of roster of abilities, good old Spirit Essence of Chaos, as well as Stave of Ruinous Corruption. This has been nerfed a whole bunch, but it does allow him to summon 2 units of Chaos Spawn over the course of a battle, including one that he can specifically target and cast behind enemy lines. So that's about 2,000 points worth of free troops that obviously do get do disintegrate over time, but nonetheless very, very potent abilities. He also does have Call of Violence, which is a good little leadership buff, as well as Foe Seeker, to make him a little more mobile, since he's a pretty slow and immobile lord otherwise. His main perk is that he is very tanky. He does have Poison, which makes enemies struggle to kind of finish him off. He does have Regen, and he does have a very high HP pool, so he's just a very, very tanky lord who's passable in melee. Alongside him, I did bring a Brave Shaman of Death. I actually brought him on foot. Generally, I try to bring these guys on a chariot, but this time around, in an effort to save costs, I did decide to simply bring him on foot, and I gave him good old Spirit Leech, as well as Fate of Buna. I also did give him the Jagged Dagger, to give him increase his power reserves and power recharge rate. Of course, this guy is going to be very good at either sniping enemy lords, or at dealing with high value targets, such as Black Orcs, or Boarboy Big Guns, or those sorts of troops that could really give me trouble. My front line here is very, very mixed. I decided, because I did invest in going rather wide, I only have 2 units of Bestigors. Now these guys will trade somewhat effectively with Black Orcs. They're not quite on par. Black Orcs, I do believe, will beat Bestigors in a 1-to-1, because they do have greater weapon strength. You can see here the Bestigors are being debuffed because my opponent did actually bring the Hammer of Gork, which is actually surprising, but he did bring the Hammer of Gork, and you can see it's whittling down the Bestigors, definitely nuking down their stats a huge amount by blinding them. But normally Bestigors are definitely pretty competitive. They can easily take on something like Black Orcs and stall them out, if not, although obviously not win. Out on the in between, we do have some Gors. The Gors will trade somewhat effectively with the Orc infantry. Once again, they're not amazing against Orc infantry. Savage Orcs, for example, will definitely beat them up pretty badly. I'm not entirely sure who wins. This is a very sort of even matchup in the front line here, but Gors, nonetheless, they can shred through the cheaper Orc infantry, and they definitely have pretty decent stats, and they're pretty cheap at the same time. Over on the flanks, though, is really, or in the back, is really where our main striking force is. We do have 3 units of Ungor Spears covering our back. Obviously, if my opponent brings a bunch of Boarboy Big Guns, I want to be able to shut those down. And the Ungor Spears, while they're obviously not great, the Orc anti-large tends to be very squishy. They tend to have very low. The cavalry tends to have very low armor, very poor melee defense. So something like Ungor Spears will actually tear through Boarboy Big Guns pretty effectively for the cost. We do have 2 units of Ungor Raiders to zone away enemy shooting. Of course, Orc shooting, while perhaps not their strength, is definitely something they can make great use of. And in this situation, my opponent, who's going for a Goblin heavy build, did decide to bring Morgrub's Mangy Marauders. And they are already whittling away at my Razor Gore Chariots. My supporting contingent here in the back is 2 units of Minotaurs with shields. These guys, of course, once again, to resist that missile fire. I was thinking about bringing Minotaurs with great weapons, but they're just so susceptible to arrows. I really didn't want them getting annihilated by a bunch of Goblin fire in the space of a few seconds. We also do have a pair of Ungor Raiders just to shut down squishy enemy targets, try to shut down enemy shooting, and to zone away those Raiders, or zone away the Morgrub's Mangy Marauders. And we also do have a Razor Gore Chariot to hopefully plow through enemy troops, disrupt them, just be a nuisance in the backline, and general troublemakers. For my opponent, as mentioned, he did go for a very Goblin heavy build, which is cool. You do see these sometimes. You can see the Ungor Raiders, though, getting a nasty volley here on the Morgrub's Mangy Marauders, knocking off a few models. It's important to keep in mind that the Marauders don't have very good HP per model. Usually cavalry will have about 100, somewhere between about 75 to 100 HP per model. These guys, I don't believe, don't even have 60 per model. So they're very, very susceptible to losing models. But for my opponent, he did go with a Goblin heavy build. So he did bring a good old Scarsnake, who's the icon of the goblins, with Scarsnake's Prodder, which is a cool little magic missile spell that beats up on clumped up formations. He does have the Wah, Spite of the Bad Moon, which is a nice little missile resist, and gives extra charge defense. And he does have Tricksy Traps, which is a good speed buff and stalk, and just a general AoE buff. That said, my opponent's main front line here is composed entirely of Nasty Skulkers and not very heavily veteraned up. And I think this is definitely a bit of a mistake on my opponent's part. Nasty Skulkers don't have good morale, even by Goblin standards. They're very, very squishy. They have no charge defense, obviously. They do have that Smoke Bomb, but in general, Nasty Skulkers are much better for backline defense and as a support tool for normal light Goblins. So I do think this is a bit of a mistake on my opponent's part. But nonetheless, they can do quite a bit of damage. They can slow down my troops, and perhaps open up opportunities for his supporting units, of which he has a lot. My opponent does also have the 2 regiments of Night Goblin regiments around, the Warlord's Boys, as well as the 8 Peak Loonies, who are of course unbreakable. So these guys will hold to the last, and they can definitely stall if they'll obviously not win the fight against the mob of Gors and Bestigors. He has more nasty skulkers on the flank. Night Goblin Shaman, interestingly enough, bring definitely some of those additional spells. He did bring Scroll of Leeching to reduce power recharge rate, Night Shroud for Stalk, and of course the usual Itchy Nuisance and Sneaky Stabbing, as well as Sneaky Stealing. Normally I don't bring Sneaky Stealing anymore, ever since it's been attached to the Sneaky Stabbing and whatnot, but I do think that it's actually still a decent, if you're only bringing a Night Goblin Shaman for casting, then it's definitely, I think, still a decent choice. He also does have a Squig Herd as well as the Durkid Squigs and an Arachnarok Queen in the back. And these guys could, of course, tear out my troops. They could definitely mess up my Ungors and Ungors very, very badly. The Ungors will not do well against an Arachnarok Queen at all. They'll get chewed through very, very quickly and kind of rout. So that's definitely one of the few things that can cause me huge amounts of trouble. And go figure, my opponent did bring them. Over here, though, you can see things are devolving very, very quickly. The Nasty Skulkers are already routing because, of course, the Gore Herd just slamming into them, full charge, and they are just crushing these guys. Skarsnik will hold his own for a little bit. He does actually have an anti-large bonus, thanks to, I suppose, Gobla, liking to munch on Minotaurs. And you can see he's biting away at these Minotaurs, biting at their ankles there. But I'm simply able to buckle my opponent's front line here. It's collapsing very, very quickly. Here in the center of things, Durkid Squigs have gotten into my backline, but Morgr is in there, and he does have the backing of these Bestigors. And while Bestigors are not ideal, they will against Squigs, they'll definitely do okay. And with the backing of all these Ungor Chariots, or Ungor Archers, they're going to be able to whittle down Durkid Squigs very, very quickly. I do get 2 summons of the Chaos Spawn back to back, and they will be able to kind of roll over my opponent's backline and start squishing all this shooting, especially with the backing of the Ungor Spears. Going very wide here is allowing me to just swamp my opponent's line as soon as it buckles. Over here on the left flank, of course, with the Arachnarok Spider as well as the Squigs, my opponent is doing much better. You can see, though, the Squigs, which are really meant to fight against infantry, are getting bogged down fighting chariots. And this is a less than ideal fight for him. Obviously, this is not good for me either. It's a waste of time for the Razor Guard Chariot. It means my Razor Guard Chariot is just not being used to its maximum potential at all. But it is tying these guys down. It is buying me the time I need to get my archers into the fight and just whittling down all these troops. Over here, you can see I drop a Spear Leech on the Arachnarok Queen, and that might seem a little strange, but really I don't have the best of tools to deal with her. All I have is Minotaurs with shields, and they don't have the anti-large bonus that the Great Weapons have. So she actually has decent melee defense at 40, so the Minotaurs will definitely struggle to hit, and it's definitely not an ideal fight for them. In the backline, though, in the meantime, my opponent's army has just kind of buckled. Most of his troops are routing and being pursued. As mentioned, I do just have that massive blob of troops, and I'm able to kind of pursue them. Over here, you can see Skarsnik actually holding his own against Morgr and the Bestigors, doing really well. Well, maybe not really well, but decent. And you can see the Mogr Managing Marauders, who are practically out of ammo, are trying to kind of poke away at my backline, trying to poke away at some of these Bestigors, but at this point, with no ammo, they're just not really going to be able to do very much. Over here, the Gors, I do believe they routed, but they'll be coming back fairly shortly. You can see the Ungors finishing off these Mogrb's Managing Marauders, who, as we've discussed before, are very squishy. That really is only leaving the Arachnarok Queen, as well as Skarsnik, who has at this point actually shattered. So really, my opponent's army is just buckling and falling apart very, very quickly. So, as you can see, we're going to throw things into fast forward here as we mop everything up and just slaughter my opponent's troops there. So, this is mostly, in some ways, I wanted to demonstrate just that there's more builds that you can do. This is actually a fairly competitive build against a lot of orcs. It works. You have Fate of Buna to deal with if your opponent brings a lot of black orcs. You do have those Bestigors to deal with enemy armor. You do have Minotaurs to deal with enemy armor. Minotaurs actually do rather well against black orcs. You do have chariots, which can sometimes do rather well. Obviously, you have to be very careful about your opponent's cavalry, since orc cavalry can strip chariots down rather quickly. But this is definitely a decent build against orcs. What I wanted to discuss, though, more so in this was with goblins. You definitely want, if you're doing a goblin build, I just wanted to kind of think a few notes. You don't want to invest actually that much into your support units. Obviously, you do want a few, and especially Squigs. Squig Hoppers are a pretty decent choice because they do have immunity to psychology. They're fast. They can do a lot of damage. But in general, you're best off making your front line composed of either Night Goblins or normal Goblins, veteran up a whole bunch to make sure their morale is decent and make sure their stats are just a little better. Nasty Skulkers are much more of a support tool. They're better off holding the line in the back. Another small note is that the artillery pieces are not necessarily worth it. Now, granted, here they got 35 and 36 kills, but that's really not paying for themselves. They're not really doing what needs to be done. The Hammer of Gork is a very iffy unit because it does debuff your own troops as well. And when you're dealing with goblins who buckle and fall apart incredibly quickly, that is not necessarily the best of things because obviously the Beastmen will still get a huge charge bonus going in. They'll just massacre your goblins, just swarm all over you. So I think in general, if you're going for a goblin heavy build, you're best off going very heavy into goblins, bring a handful of support units, bring good archery, Goblin archery is actually really solid. Never underestimate orc skirmishers, and that'll definitely help you hold the line. And definitely try to hold the line with more veteraned up goblins. The Ragnarok Spider is a cool little touch, but once again, it's very expensive. I'm personally, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of it for the events, but I don't think it's the best of choices for the investing in this many support units. Definitely try to work on that front line and then archery, just to whittle your opponent down and essentially just swarm them. That's really what good goblin strategy comes down to. As usual, guys, I do hope you enjoyed. Great game to my opponent Ogaro here. It was quick and fun, and it was definitely entertaining to see. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below so you can keep up with additional content. If you have any comments, criticism, anything like that, be sure to post those down and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.